Welcome to the world of ancient Greece. So we're here in the Mediterranean on both the Greek mainland, known as the Peloponnese, and in the islands known as the Cyclades. So we see that Greece is sort of at the intersection of multiple different empires. And in the period that we'll be looking at today, from the Archaic through the Hellenistic period, Greece really comes into its own. And we'll be looking at sort of regional identity. And the reason that this happens is because Greece is organized in poleis. A polis is a city, but it's a city state. So it's not just the city itself, but it's kind of all of the hinterlands united together as an entity with a patron deity looking out over your particular polis. So for example, the polis of Athens is dedicated to the goddess Athena. In this period, there is a great effort by the Greeks to push back against the expanding Persian Empire, which moved into modern day Turkey and sort of threatened the edges of the Greek territories here. We'll watch the developments of artistic styles as the politics of Greece change, and then ultimately we'll end with the expansion of the Macedonian kingdom under Alexander the Great, who ruled from 336 to 323 before the Common Era, before his sudden death in his early 30s, which precipitated the collapse of his empire, which is probably the largest empire that has ever been sustained in the ancient world. The reason that Greece is so important in terms of the artistic developments that come out of this ancient period is because in the Renaissance, and even subsequently today, there's a historical tendency to look at ancient Greece as sort of the crucible or the forge of Western civilization. And I want to make several points today that the Greek world was actually extremely multicultural and hybrid, and also that our interpretation of Greek art has suffered the vicissitudes of time. Namely, the art that we look at in museums today is not authentic to how it looked when it was created by its contemporaries. So we'll begin with the idea of sanctuaries. And a sanctuary is obviously a sacred space where gods can be venerated, revered, prayed to. And the pantheistic religion of Greece meant that there was a whole group of different gods. Pantheon just means all gods or all holy things. And so you could have a very personal relationship with a specific deity. And then you would go to that deity's particular temple to maybe make a votive offering to the god or goddess, or to ask for a favor, or to say thank you for something. So we'll look today on the island of Delos at a sanctuary dedicated to Apollo. And Apollo is a pan-Hellenic god, namely, he's not just the god that's associated with one particular polis, but rather he's sort of a supra-Greek god, right? Connecting all of the different Greek poleis together with a sort of uber god identity. So you have to go up a huge mountain to get to the top of this sanctuary, which gives us the impression of being closer to the heavens, right? If we think of Mount Olympus, where the Greek gods live and goddesses, it's up high in the sky. And so this would be mimicking that sort of transcending up into the heavens. And Apollo had games dedicated to him. He's the patron of music, arts, and divination. And because of his association with divination, his sanctuary here housed an oracle. And this oracle, it has been since proven, was positioned over a crevice in the earth through which various gases passed and precipitated a state of kind of being in connection with the other world. But really, this is kind of like getting high off of a particular not chemical, but a particular substance that is being exuded from the earth. And so you could go to the oracle and ask for clues to the future, for interpretation of various events. So we can see the columns here, which we'll discuss shortly. And this actually looks out over the water, and it's quite stunning. But the monumental architecture associated with the sanctuaries obviously further reinforces the power of the god or the goddess to whom they're dedicated. This is what Apollo's sanctuary may have looked like in a reconstruction here. And we can see this pediment, this triangular shaped element on top of the columns here, would have depicted all kinds of different scenes in sculpture in low relief. And then we see statues everywhere, including even this sort of shadow of a big statue of Apollo that would be over here. And the place where people could walk up during the festivals and celebrations to that god. The columns are very important to Greek architecture, and we see the development of three different styles: the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian. The Doric style is the simplest, and here we have an actual example of the Doric. And we can just see that we have the part of the capital here that's serving as a support for the crossbeam underneath the pediment. Very, very simple, very, very kind of stylized and plain. A step up from this is the Ionic, and we start to see the development of a volute. This is the portion at the top where we get like almost a scroll-like shape in the capital. So again, serving more or less the same purpose, and has the Ionic has a base added in addition to this sort of fluted part at the bottom of the Doric. And then finally, the fanciest version, and my personal favorite, is the Corinthian. And the Corinthian capital, in addition to having the same kind of base as the Ionic column, the Corinthian capital is decorated with what we acanthosis leaves. So here's an example of the acanthosis. And this is a leaf that was quite common in the Mediterranean, but really lends itself to this sort of foliate, curly Q, really elaborate depiction in sculpture. And so you see this all the way through the Middle Ages as well as being a favorite plant to depict on column capitals. Moving to Athens now, we can look at the Acropolis, Acropolis meaning high city. So just like the temple at Delos to Apollo, you got to climb all the way up. If you've ever been to the Acropolis, you know how sort of hot and the sun is beating down on you as you're ascending. And we can see a number of different structures that would have been part of this sort of crowning glory of Athens. And before we get into the Parthenon itself, which is the structure on the right here, it's worth noting the historical circumstances in which the Acropolis was built. So by this point in the 5th century, under the aegis or under the governorship of Pericles, we see Athens really coming into its own, becoming the head of the Delian League, really setting itself up as the protector and the ensurer of democracy and of philosophy and art and architecture, right? Athens becoming sort of the head of Greece. And under Pericles, the Acropolis and particularly the Parthenon are built as a way to shore up Athenian self-confidence in the city and Athenian civic pride, right? If you have these monuments, you can be proud of the city that you're coming from. And so it's really engaging with Athenian identity. The Acropolis, dedicated to Athena as a whole, but in her particular iteration as Athena Parthenos. So this is the virginal Athena. She has multiple different personalities kind of, or figures that she can fulfill, serving different religious purposes. And so this is the one dedicated to her as the virgin. So that's why this building is called the Parthenon. In order to build such a monumental structure, Pericles spent a lot of Athens's money that it took in as tribute from the other city-states, including Sparta. And the interesting thing about the Parthenon is that it is set up mathematically specifically to give a pleasing significance to the viewer. So everything is mathematically formed based on a particular ratio, which is a ratio of 9:4. And there are very few right angles and straight lines in the Parthenon also. So it serves to sort of draw your eye up, get the sense that it's looming before you. The mathematical precision of the creation of the Parthenon, again, alludes to this sort of ideal of balance or of proper rule in the city of Athens. And we should remember also that this whole structure, which was never open to the elements like this, it was always a concrete building with walls that had not survived, this whole thing would have been painted. So when we think back on what is proper or pure Greek sculpture and architecture, we should always remember that it was not this sort of bone white that we are so used to seeing in our museums and in the landscape today. We have a couple of votive objects here, or objects intended to glorify various deities. So we have a head of Apollo from Delphi, and this is also a chryselephantine structure. So we know that that means that it is coated with ivory and with plate gold. And it had been buried as an offering to the god Apollo. And it's made of elephant tusks. So that's where the ivory is coming from. Parts of it were damaged in a fire, but we know that tremendous care went into the creation of this object to glorify the god, right, as a votive offering, because even the eyelashes are gold plate here, giving us this idea of Apollo as a sun god, right, a radiant deity. On the right, we have a head of Athena, goddess of, slipped my mind. Minerva is the goddess of wisdom. We'll come back to this. And she is depicted here from a burial mound treasure, which was actually found on the shores of the Black Sea rather than in Greece proper. So we can see the spreading of all of these ideas in the period of Hellenization, which we'll discuss. And this golden disc was created using the technique of repoussé, and this means pushed from the back. So the item would be flipped over and hammered from the back to create a relief on the front side, which you could then see. We also have beautiful enamel in here and filigree, which is the creation of these sort of curlicue shapes or maybe floral motifs using gold or silver threads that are very, very delicate, wrapped around and sort of shaped in these paisley or curlicue images. To move to the sculpture for which Greece is so famous, we see here two fairly seminal positions, postures of sculpture. On the left here, we have a bronze statue of Zeus, which had actually been found in the water, leading some people to think it was Poseidon, but it is Zeus because of his posture. He's in the warrior pose. He has his hand back as though about to cast the thunderbolt. That was his particular weapon of choice, and his arm in the front out as balance, sort of in this very athletic, almost like throwing a javelin kind of position as we would see in the Olympics today. And his weight is forward. And so I want you to start to pay attention to the weight and how the statue serves to kind of represent actual physical human body weight. So these are not statues that are very static. These are statues that have the personality of a real human body. On the right here, we have a statue of Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. And this is based on a very, very famous sculptor called Praxiteles. This, I believe, is a Roman copy. But what we're seeing here is Aphrodite at her bath. And she is in our classic contrapposto position. So the contrapposto, which we can translate from the Italian into sort of counterpoise, is a position whereby one of the legs is sort of removed from weight bearing, whereas the other leg endures the body weight. And we also get an S shape out of the contrapposto because it kind of pushes the hip out on one side. And so you get this sort of S shape of the body based on the way the weight is being distributed. Her hand is strategically covering her genitals, but nevertheless, we do get a sense of what's called voyeurism of this image, as though we've sort of pulled back the curtains and we're spying on Aphrodite at her bath. And we see here an urn in the amphora shape with the two handles and the thin neck, and then also her drapery. So as we're looking at sculpture, I want you to also start to pay attention specifically to the way that folds are being depicted in carved drapery. It's also worth noting that typically Greek females are depicted clothed. And so we're seeing a break with tradition here with this Aphrodite, where we're actually seeing the goddess nude. It's quite common for men to be depicted nude, more uncommon in the early period for women to be depicted nude. So moving on with this sort of figures of the female body and the way that folds can give hints to the shape of bodies beneath. On the left, we have the Porch of the Maidens in Athens. And these are actually all replicas right now. The originals are inside museum. And these are most likely caryatid figures. And caryatids are young women in their drapery that serve actually as columns to support the crossbeam above them. And so these women are actually part of the structure and the structural integrity of this sanctuary. We can see that they have sleeveless style tunics that have a frill around the waist, but just pay attention to the linearity of these folds, almost like accordion folds, long, simple drape. It's not a very confusing mess of fabrics, but this gives a suggestion of elegance and a suggestion of kind of upright posture. On the right, we have a kore, which is a figure that's the female version of the Koros, which we saw last week. And this Korae was found in a grave of a woman, Phrasiclea. Sometimes I have trouble with the Greek. So the Korae, by contrast to the Koros, the male, the Korae is always clothed. And in this particular case, we have this young woman wearing a crown of lotus flowers with lotus seeds and blooms in various stages, suggesting that she was taken too soon, that she died too young. And what's interesting about this particular Korae is that we know that it was a depiction of a real human mortal girl rather than a goddess. As I said, it was found in her tomb. And as such, it serves also as a votive or as a sort of funerary marker. And the Korae is always freestanding, just like the Koros. And the plural of the Korae is Korai. We have a Koros here on the left, so you can see immediately the distinction between how the female Korae is depicted versus the male Koros. But again, attention to the actual formatting of the human body, tremendously detailed, right? You can actually see the abs, you can see the shin bone. If you got closer, you would be able to see cuticles, you would be able to see veins, you can see the clavicles. I mean, it's really a lot of attention to naturalistic depiction of the human body. What's interesting, though, in this still quite early image, is we get this little smile. And this is a smile known as the archaic smile, where it's a sort of thin smile with the edges turned up. This is intended to kind of give a dynamism to the facial structure of the statue, but quite interestingly, it does fall out of favor later in favor of more accurate or more authentic human expressions. On the right here, sorry, we have two different sections from the pediment of the Temple of Apphia. And these are interesting to compare to each other because they're showing a lot of transition in very subtle ways in the same piece of art. And so these were actually carved around the same time, not centuries apart as had previously been perceived. So on the top, we have a fellow who has been stricken with an arrow. And so the arrow would have protruded from here, but we don't really get any sense that he's like just fallen down or that he's really, in a lot of pain. His legs are crossed over each other in kind of an unnatural way, and he's got that archaic smile. His body, while realistic, you can see a couple of ribs here and a little bit of the way that the stomach muscles would move and in the arms here, nevertheless is somewhat static. When we look at the later version, which we call the severe style, we're getting a more authentic human reaction to war. In this case, we can definitely see more contouring and more musculature. So the muscles are actually being depicted and showcased here. We can see the straining and the tension in the muscles in a way that we don't see in this kind of casual posture at the top. We also see more of a grimace than that archaic smile and a sense of weight. His arm is bent under the tremendous weight of this shield. His head is bowed down under the weight of his helmet, rather than this kind of more perky pose that we see in the earlier style. So in this transition, in this one art object of this temple, we can actually see quite a few things that are going to then take over as the standard Greek styles. An example of drapery here in the east pediment of the Parthenon. This depicts probably three different goddesses: Hestia, goddess of the hearth and the family; Dione, the mother of Aphrodite; and then Aphrodite herself here, probably recognizable with her garment off of her shoulder here. This whole section is 10 feet long. So this is huge monumental sculpture, again, out of marble. And the folds here obscure the body, but contort the body. So we're not seeing bare legs, but we know what position the legs are in because of the way that these folds are falling across the lap, collecting at the joint, spread out as the fabric pulls itself by its own weight, and then sort of collected here between the legs. And so there's a lot of sense of movement and sense of dynamism that's afforded by the actual folds and fabric, not by the posture of the body itself. So additional sections of this structure wound up in the possession of who we call Lord Elgin, or in England, Lord Elgin. So this is Thomas Bruce, depicted here at the left. And on either side of the year 1800, he was the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. And because of a lot of conflict between the Ottoman Turks and the Greeks, there was real anxiety that this amazing sculpture would be damaged. And so the Ottoman authorities actually gave Lord Elgin permission to remove some of the marble sculpture, which today is often known as the Elgin marbles, and we should definitely challenge that name. And this has sparked centuries of debate and controversy. So those who criticize Lord Elgin's collection of the marbles, and we can see them on display here in this temporary room at the British Museum, they say that Greece is in a much better position now than it was in the early 19th century. There's even a museum waiting for the return of these pieces, like to the point where you go into the museum and there's empty spaces waiting for these items to be repatriated. And those who support the removal of these objects to the British Museum say that they probably would have been damaged. More people go to London than they do to Athens, so more people are likely to actually enjoy and see these marble sculptures. And the British Museum itself has upheld its sort of status as a repository of all of the world's art. So even though this has been taken out of its native context in Greece, nevertheless, the British Museum is sort of an ambassador of global art, in their opinion. So I want you to think about this through the semester, this issue of should we repatriate items that were effectively, according to some, stolen from certain cultures in this sort of colonial or colonizing agenda, or should things stay where they are safely and on display to the general public? Just a couple more examples of the beautiful drapery. These are two of perhaps the most famous Greek statues. We've got the Winged Victory of Samothrace on the left, and this is in the Louvre. This is a depiction of Nike Athena, sort of the victory figure. And then on the right, we have the Aphrodite of Melos, which you probably are familiar with as the Venus de Milo. So this is, again, a very, very famous depiction of the goddess. And in both of these cases, intending to communicate a certain story to their audience, right? On the left here, Nike was actually on top of a big ship, signaling probably a naval victory. And on the right here, we have just sort of a paean or a homage to the female body in its most perfect form in the goddess of love and beauty. So again, just to reiterate, when we develop ideas of what is like the ideal Greek statue, the ideal Greek figure, we should remember that these were painted in what seemed to us to be extremely garish color schemes. So the polychromy, or the multiple colors of paint that were originally affixed to these statues, right? The marble was not the finished product. The marble was the base for these bright colors. Just think about how these colors would have been blaring in that sort of Mediterranean sun, perched up on these high hills like the Acropolis, et cetera, really making a statement about Greek identity. And then the other aspect of this, which you'll engage with this week in the media, is the issue of whitewashing the past. And so when we think about the perfect that comes from this Greek culture, in no way was that pure white. We have come to internalize this idea through the age of imperialism, through all of the damage that these sculptures have suffered because of the wind and the rain and the paint flaking off. And because a lot of these were first reproduced in black and white, we have this idea that the perfect form is a white form. And in no way does authentic Greek art from the time period actually corroborate that idea. So on the right here, we have a Greek statue, a bronze that was found in Italy, the Riace warrior. And we can see here that this statue would have been covered with this gold paint and the very sort of dark swarthy features and dark hair, dark eyes, and dark complected flesh. And again, look at this detail here. You just see these arteries and veins and tendons really suggesting the correct depiction of the human form in terms of authenticity and naturalism. So just to finish off on these 2 points, remember when you're looking at Greek and also Roman art, to remember the context in which it was made and to challenge and to interrogate how our general understanding, without thinking about these colors or these depictions, how that does a disservice to the art that was created in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Here are your vocabulary terms. Good luck on your quiz. Thank you.